The deep state has been a recent topic of conversation. In the recent WikiLeaks of CIA hacking documents, it's hard to say who we can actually really trust. Former CIA officer and American activist Robert Steele recently sat down with Sean Stone to discuss the new administration, from military spending to the potential destruction of the new president. Sean started by asking him his take on the assertion that Obama was behind the recent leaks and protests.
Well, let me divide it into three parts. Part one is I think Obama stayed in Washington to be the Rothschilds' personal representative as we go into a financial crash this summer. Number two, Obama's being laughed at by Soros and the Democratic Party. They don't really like his organization. Now, his organization will play a role, but he's the lightweight compared to Soros and the color revolution playbook that's being brought back to the United States. The third thing I would say is that the leaks coming out of the White House are coming out of disgruntled employees that weren't properly vetted. Donald Trump has a rotten staff. He hasn't done a good job of building his team. Everyone I can think of, including Priebus and McMaster, are not his friends. McMaster's a direct spy for McCain, and Priebus is a direct spy for Paul Ryan. Trump needs to clean house.
So what is limiting it? Because frankly, it's very difficult to figure out what Trump really is about, whether it's many people expected that he was going to be obviously pro-industrial, trying to build up the United States economy, but now he's saying we must put $50 billion into the war economy, for example.
Oh, I'm glad you bring that up, because I love Donald Trump. I think he could be the greatest president in modern history, but he has made so many mistakes. And putting $54 billion more into a military that cannot fight and win wars today, a military that is documented as 50% waste from weapons acquisition to Afghanistan, a military that has more admirals than ships, a military whose officer corps across the U.S. Army is known to be lying. There's actually an excellent monograph that says it's called Lying to Ourselves, Dishonesty in the Military Profession. All right? Trump has no business adding money to the Pentagon, particularly since the Pentagon consumes 60% of the disposable budget of the United States, 16% of the total, and we're spending more for a worthless military, including contractors at a 6-to-1 ratio, 6 contractors for every soldier. We're spending more than not just Russia, China, but Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, North Korea, and another 6 countries. It's insane. So what that tells me is that Trump has a rotten staff. He's not getting a holistic picture, and he's literally winging it. He's making too many mistakes, and he's going to be destroyed this summer, I think.
Okay, so let's talk about that, this destruction process. We're already seeing it with the mainstream media. It's a very interesting war that's going on. Obviously, in the daily press, you see almost every article in the New York Times is oriented against Trump in some form, one aspect or another of his policies. But this vehemence, obviously, is there. And then he retaliates, or maybe he precipitates, he retaliates, you name it. He does basically try to ban New York Times and CNN and others from one of their gatherings, for example, press gatherings. So what can Trump actually do to avert what could ultimately precipitate, because we know what the mainstream media can do as far as Nixon, for example, with Watergate, in pushing the stories until it becomes such a mass movement that the president is ultimately Watergate. In this case, it could be around Russia, it could be any number of things that ultimately catch up to Trump.
The mainstream media is a sock puppet stooge for CIA and Wall Street and the deep state. There are actually 4 tracks to the destruction of Donald Trump. Track 1 is the mainstream media and the lies that they're telling, and the whole idea of Donald Trump being eligible for impeachment and so forth. They're carrying forward a narrative that is coming out of the deep state that has no basis in truth. The second track is a racketeering conspiracy being led by Eric Schmidt, which is engaging Google surrogates such as AdRoll and YouTube, and then, of course, Facebook and Twitter. They're testing their wings in censoring all pro-Trump voices and closing down pro-Trump websites such as Alex Jones, who lost $3.5 million without due process of law. I've encouraged him to file a $100 million lawsuit against Google. So I'd like to see Jeff Sessions do a racketeering investigation, starting with Eric Schmidt and so forth. The third track is the Soros track. Obama's the lightweight here. Soros is spending over $50 million. I think when you add in money from other people, it's going to be closer to $100 to $200 million. And what is going to happen is soon as the weather gets warm, is we're going to see Berkeley times 1,000. And I want to make an important point on why Berkeley was allowed to go as far as it was. Because the governors, the mayors, and the university presidents are all against Trump. Law enforcement is being told to stand down. The governors want a violent America this summer. They want Donald Trump to go away. The fourth track is what David Stockman has so brilliantly discussed, and I'd love to see Stockman considered as Trump's chief of staff. He has talked about how we're coming up in June on not only a debt ceiling problem with the United States, but also Wall Street, the Federal Reserve, everybody's going to kick out the props from under the economic bubble that we've been living in. So we're going to crash the economy, plain and simple. And they're hoping that by crashing the economy and by having a lot of people in the streets and by having the mainstream media tell lies and by having Google and Facebook and Twitter repress the truth, they will create the perfect storm, and Donald Trump will finally say, I give up.
And what happens then? I mean, if Donald Trump gives up, let's say, what then? Does he then continue the sanctions and the new Cold War with Russia?
He's
does
out.
He
quits.
Oh,
he's gone.
Okay, completely gone.
Think about Donald Trump at night in his bathrobe, all alone in the White House, looking for cockroaches. Okay. The White House is a very low-rent place for Donald Trump to be living, and he has allowed the Secret Service to lock him in. I mean, even Hillary Clinton did not do that. She would go for walks. She would go anywhere she wanted, and the Secret Service just had to tag along. I think Donald Trump will quit because it's not worth it. And so what will happen is Mike Pence will become the face of the deep state. And in a worst-case basis, he'll bring in either Elizabeth Warren for a so-called unity ticket, or he'll bring in Jeb Bush. The Bush family has not given up on the idea of another Bush in the White House. I don't make this stuff up. This is what's being talked about.
You're saying the best case scenario is Elizabeth Warren, the worst case is Bush.
Actually, both of them are worst case. For me, a best case scenario would be Donald Trump stays and gets a proper chief of staff, gets a Trump channel, creates a grand strategy and orders his cabinet members to stop contradicting him overseas. I mean, Tillerson and Mattis and Pence have all been contradicting Donald Trump overseas. There's no control here. There's no discipline. And last but not least, he needs an Electoral Reform Act. I've been talking to Cynthia McKinney, and there's absolutely no question but that if Trump doesn't do an Electoral Reform Act that brings out all of the Americans who will understand that the two-party tyranny, the deep state, is basically our common enemy. You know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
In America today, the two-party tyranny, the deep state, the CIA telling lies, NSA spying on all of our politicians and then blackmailing them,